Thank you to everybody for joining us today. We'll be beginning the webinar shortly, so please sit tight. And again, thank you for everybody for joining us today. We'll be starting the webinar shortly. Give us another minute or two. Thank you. Okay, I think we can get started. Thank you very much for joining us today for our webinar, Reality Check, Navigating the Landscape of the New United States Postal Service. My name is Bob Tiedegan. I'm the Director of Marketing at GrayHair. I'll be working today with my marketing associate, Denise Siebold. We'll be monitoring the questions in chat. Before we get started, I want to go through some of the logistics. Just let everybody know, of course, the webinar is being recorded. Everyone's lines will be muted during the presentations, but feel free to ask any questions or put anything in the chat. That's where Denise and I will be monitoring it. All questions will be answered by the end of the presentation. If we do run out of time, of course, we will provide anybody those responses after the event. And we'll also provide everybody a recording. Will be emailed a day or two after the webinar. So let's jump into it. Today's event features GrayHair's Vice President of Postal Affairs, Angelo Anagnostopoulos. A quick word about Angelo. For the past 35 plus years, Angelo has been one of the leading voices in the postal industry, from leadership positions at MTAC and major industry associations, and also providing extensive guidance to major mailers and service providers, and working directly with the Postal Service on a wide variety of issues and regulations. So everybody, Angelo is going to take over from here.
All right. Thank you, Bobby. So I'm going to cover a variety of different topics as you saw in the agenda. I think each of which can probably be a webinar onto itself. And towards the end, I'm going to cover just some various other topics that our industry needs to be aware of. Again, each one of those slides could probably be a whole separate webinar. And if there's some interest in that and getting more into detail, if you let Bobby know, we can consider doing that as a future webinar. So I thought I'd start off with just some USPS related items that I'm going to cover in a little bit more detail as we get through this presentation. I do want to allocate some time at the end for questions because I'm likely to say some things that might be controversial. You might have some questions on some of this stuff, and a lot of this content is brand new, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you haven't seen it, so that it could result in some questions being asked. So the first item, we saw the legislature pass legislation, or what's called the PSRA legislation, and with that, the Postal Service, I think for the next 10 years, is going to see about $107 billion in reduction of what they owe, especially for retiree health benefits and for some other things. One of the things we were hoping for is that the Postal Service would take that into consideration with price increases. But, as they said, as the Postmaster General said, we haven't really taken advantage since the old legislation from 2006, and we need the money, and so we're going to stick with twice a year price increases. And I'll talk a little bit about why that's problematic. The only other thing that's really going on of note is that there's a bill that's been introduced, the Ensuring Accurate Postal Rates Act. And what that's really intended to do is it's intended to get the PRC to relook at the additional authority under the 10-year review that they've granted the Postal Service, because it doesn't seem like the PRC wants to do anything about it. I mean, even if nothing happens in a couple of years, they're supposed to look at it again, because after the enactment of the additional authority, they said in 5 years we were going to look at that again. So something's going to happen. And now that everybody's concentrating on elections, I don't think this bill is going to pass. I mean, there is a chance that it might get into some appropriations language in that, but I think it's just something that was put out there to say, hey, this is something important and we need to pay attention to it in the Congress. And so the next item, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time here, and that's the network changes that are happening in the next couple of years. I think the Postmaster General recently said, they wanted to get a good chunk of it done in 2 years and a bulk of it done in 4 years. And then I was listening to a video that he put out, and he said, that's going to take him the better part of 10 years to completely finish. And it's one of those things where it's going to be in a state of flux, because I think as they build out some of these facilities, as you'll see, that they're calling them pilot sites, and that could change the plan. But we'll talk a little bit about what that means. Now, as part of that, we're going to have to get used to some new nomenclature. And so we're going to have RPCs, LPCs, and SDCs, and I'll cover what those mean in a little while. Now, changes have already started, and some facilities are trying to get up prior to peak or during peak, which might be problematic, and I'll talk a little bit about that and what's going on with that. And then what we're seeing as a result of some of this stuff is we are seeing some impacts a little bit in first class, outbound and reply mail. I think a lot of that had to do with some of the primaries and the fact that the Postal Service prioritizes political and election mail to make sure that that gets through their network. And that's probably a subject unto itself for maybe another webinar, because what the Postal Service does is they go through extraordinary measures to make sure that the ballots get out. I mean, you can understand from a political perspective why they do that. The downside of that is, it passes all those costs on to all other classes of mail. And so, one of the things we've been talking about recently is, that really should be its own class of mail with its own pricing and that. But I don't know that the Postal Service will go there, even though you'll see in one of the slides that I grabbed from the Postal Service, they are talking about the product mix. And I'm taking that to mean that they're going to look at the different products. I mean, they've already consolidated, as an example, a lot of the parcel products in the retail ground space and all that. And I do expect a lot more changes as this network gets built out. And then one of the things I'm predicting is as a result of all of these network changes, we are going to see an uptick in address change data that's coming back to us. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. A couple of other items. So we just saw last Friday the Postal Service filed the market dominant price increase. It was based on the August CPI of 4.2%. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. There are some significant mail preparation changes, primarily in flats. And a lot of that is so that they can get ready and incent people to prepare mail to fit the new network. And so we'll see a lot of that. We'll see some of that stuff in July also, when we see the next increase, as well as I think by next July, they want to start to introduce some of these new facility types, because one of the things that we've heard from the Postal Service is that they want to at least get a few of those facilities up and running. And because they're not far enough and some things have been delayed, some of the changes that they were thinking of putting in the January increase price change, they're going to put into the July. So we can expect some other changes, not just a price increase and the density adder and all of the rest of that stuff that they have additional authority to do. And then lastly, there's this CAS Cycle O that's coming up in August. And I have a couple of slides that Adam Collinson, our addressing expert, gave to me, and I'll talk a little bit about that. There are some pretty major changes, mostly industry driven. Implementation has been delayed, and the Postal Service used COVID-19 as the excuse for that to delay it a couple more years from when it was originally going to go in place. And I always say, even before that goes into place, some of the findings that we have do provide an opportunity to make some changes today and get ready for it and take advantage of some of the discussions around what's going to happen with that. So this is from the PRC website, and you could see the authority, and you could see the August where they had the authority to raise rates by 4.2%. The interesting thing about that is because of where we are with inflation, the numbers just keep going up and up and up and up. And if we're looking at twice a year increases, that could be problematic, especially from a budgeting perspective. And so our friends at Quad had been keeping track of what the cumulative effect of price increases are. And you can see that as of the last one that took place, you can see some of these categories, especially in flats, have really gotten hit. And what I'm predicting is in 2023, we're going to see at least a 10% combined, January, July increase. And then in 2024, I think we're going to see about the same thing. So that's about another 20+% we're going to see. And in some of these categories, like first class flats as an example, I mean, since January of 2021, prices are going up by over 50%. And so again, depending upon inflation and volume declines, these numbers could go up because, as we know, the Postal Service has the right to raise prices as volume levels decrease. And so you get into this kind of cycle where the prices go up, people mail less, and then the prices go up even more. And so we want to make sure we keep an eye on that and what's going on. All right, so one of the things that the Postal Service put and is in place right now are the parcel surcharges. These are pretty similar to what FedEx and UPS and others do. And what they do is they take advantage because, during peak season, there's so much additional parcel volume. You have to have more staff, you have more transportation, you have more processing, more overtime and all that. And it's really an opportunity, I think, for the carriers to at least collect some additional money for that. So if you're if you mail parcels and you're in the market dominant space, you're really changing prices 3 times a year. So that's a little bit of a problem. Now, the only good thing about that, and here's the other prices for parcels. The only good thing about that is the Postal Service tried to align the end of the surcharge with the market dominant price change and the parcel price change, which I think we're expecting within the next month or so to be filed. And I'm guessing that it's going to go into effect on January 22, same as the market dominant increase. And so we'll have to see what that's going to look like. Now, this is just an excerpt from a DMM advisory and other communications that the Postal Service put out last Friday, saying that they were increasing rates. And we always get kind of this little snapshot of just a subset of the pricing. It's really interesting when you look at stuff at an aggregate level versus when you look at it in detail, because the devil's always in the details, because different people mail different ways. And one of the things that the Postal Service does is they try to maximize their revenue by hitting certain categories where the volume is. And so here's some of the highlights of what's going on with this price change. Again, there's a lot more detail to this. The overall average was 4.2%. There was no change in full service or seamless incentives, which is really good. It's good to keep those in place. The forever stamp and the single piece price went up by 5% because they increased that in penny increments. And for the first time, they didn't have to follow this kind of Board of Governors rule about raising it up a nickel at a time. So they raised it to 63 cents. And because they did that, what that did was that benefited first class pre-sort letters and cards, because they got a little bit of a below average increase. Now, 3.568, you might say, well, that's what's going on there. But I predict that most people are going to see well over 4%, because like I said, the Postal Service in putting the numbers out there. So as an example, the 5-digit rate got a much higher increase than the AADC rate, which got a much higher increase than the mixed AADC rate. So they're trying to get additional revenue by hitting the categories that have most of the volume. And as you'll see as a theme here, flats across the board, including periodicals, got a much higher increase because they're underwater and they have to raise those 2% above everything else within that particular class. For the same reason, marketing mail letters did pretty good as compared to marketing mail flats. And then, this next section is around some of the things that they're doing with the network and trying to incent flats and carrier route mail to be put onto pallets that go to the SCF or cross-dockable all the way down to the delivery unit. And so you'll see here there's some incentives there for that type of mail to try to produce it and prepare it so that it's cross-dockable, so that it doesn't have to be processed in the upstream facilities, so that it can go all the way down to the SCF or what's going to be referred to as an LPC and get sorted for delivery, or going down to the delivery unit and being cased. And so we'll have to see what happens there. Marketing mail parcels, which are underwater, did get much higher increase than the rest of it. And then as you can see with periodicals, and a lot of that has to do with what Sharon Owens calls cap math. You could see that in county got a much higher increase than outside county. In county is still less to mail from a postage perspective than outside county, but that's where that's at. And a lot of that is attributed to what the Postal Service calls cap math and making sure that the numbers all work out. With this filing, we also saw a list of promotions, and I'm going to highlight just a couple of them. So one of the things that the Postal Service did was increase the discount percentage on some of these categories. And the other thing that they did was they removed the earned value reply, but baked it into the personalized color trans promo. And so with personalized color trans promo, if you don't have a reply envelope, you get a 3% discount, but if you include one, you get 4% discount. So what was a pretty decent discount is about a 1% discount, and it has to be tied to that promotion. One of the other things of note is the informed delivery promotion. They introduced what they call an MSP discount of 0.5%. Yesterday, there were a lot of questions around, well, what if the mail owner is preparing and submitting all of the information for the promotion? Do they get the 0.5%? And it seemed, the Postal Service seemed to say that, yes, that they would also be eligible. So it's not just truly an MSP discount. And when you add agencies and other people into the mix there, it's going to be very challenging for the Postal Service to figure out who gets that 0.5% additional authority. So it'll be interesting to see once the details come out of these promotions with all the rules and everything, how that's all going to work. And then there's two new promotions, Reply Mail IMBA, which is the new accounting method that the Postal Service has to send you a bill for business reply mail that comes back. And there's two flavors of the discount depending upon whether you use a unique IMB or you don't. And then the other new promotion is what they call retarget mail. So as an example, if you use a postcard to send something, let's say somebody was on your website and they, put something in the cart and then abandon the cart, and you send them a postcard, the Postal Service will give you a 5% discount for that. And it'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out and how the rules come out for that. And so now we're going to switch topics and talk a little bit about service performance. Like I said, this is a pretty big area and something we all need to pay attention to. And I'll just talk a little bit about a couple of things on what to watch out for. I didn't put a slide in here about some of the pending PRC activity around the dashboard that the Postal Service is required to provide. But just a kind of a comment on that real quick. So the dashboard that the Postal Service is required to put out, according to the new PRC rules, is they have to update that on a weekly basis. And it is supposed to go down to a zip code level. The idea being that consumers can go out there and take a look at, see what their mail delivery looks like. One of the problems I've always had with these types of dashboards, which doesn't really exist within our systems, because we really look at all of the volume. It's based on highly sanitized data, meaning that it's only information that's in service performance measurement. And the data on the dashboard is probably about a month behind. So you're kind of looking in a rearview mirror. It's not really actionable, but from a consumer perspective, I think it's pretty good, because at least they could see on average what their mail delivery looked like in the past. And so we'll have to see how that kind of rolls out. But I'm not a big fan of it, even though I think there is some use for that out in the consumer industry. Now, as facilities transition, I do expect that we could see some degradation in service, especially the SDCs. And I have a slide on that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. One of the things that is in the Delivering for America plan is, the Postal Service wants to move letters, flats, and parcels of all classes in the same network on the same trucks. And so I thought about that, and I thought, well, how does that differentiate first class from marketing mail, right? If it's all traveling on ground on the same vehicles. One of the things we did notice is the Postal Service is making some changes. Marketing mail is starting to get delivered a little bit earlier. So really, what's going to remain in first class? I think it's stuff that is personalized and is not open to inspection. So I don't think you're going to see a lot of marketing type activity in first class, as the network progresses and as things change, and what's going to happen. And one of the other things is, because of the way that the network is going to change, what is that going to do to drop shipping, and what is that going to look like in the future? And I'll talk a little bit more about that. One of the things, and we saw that with the January price changes, there are going to be incentives for cross-dock pallets, because the Postal Service doesn't want sacks. And there's going to be a Federal Register coming out, I think, by the end of the week, to talk a little bit more about that, especially for flats. I think the only sacks they really want or are going to allow are going to be carry route mail that's directly sent to the delivery unit. So things are going to change. People are going to have to adapt to that. And as the first slide said, that's the reality of where we're at. And one of the things that the Postal Service is doing is they're focusing on parcels, which could lead to attrition of mail volume. So we could see mail volume declines as this stuff progresses. And we all know that the Postal Service needs the mail to go along with the parcels to make it viable for them to show up at every single address. And then, what's going to happen with flats and periodicals? Are they ever going to cover their costs? I mean, we heard yesterday that it's going to be over 10 years before periodicals are going to cover their costs. So that they're going to see, above average increases, because the whole class is underwater, an extra 2%, at least for the next 10 years. And I expect, periodical volumes of the future are going to keep going down and down and down as more of that stuff gets pushed to digital. So one of the things that I kind of get a little bit of a chuckle at is the Postal Service puts out these weekly press releases around how well service is. And one of the things that they tout is, that the time to deliver mail pieces or packages across a network is 2.4 days. And while that might be true off of, again, the sanitized data, the devil's always in the detail. And so they always talk about where they're at with service performance. And again, that is not necessarily accurate, especially when you look at certain areas of the country as things happen, as the network gets evolved. So that's just something, we're going to have to keep an eye on. I mean, even, and this is off of an internal postal dashboard, you could see, where reply mail is. The scale of it, goes from 90 to 92.6%. So it's a little bit exaggerated when you see it, but they're pretty consistent around 91%. One of the problems the Postal Service has, and the reason why I put the slide in here is for those that don't know, is when they look at their internal dashboards, it doesn't include caller holdout mail. And so for the larger companies out there that get a lot of mail, the Postal Service pulls that mail out and doesn't delivery point sequence it, puts it into trays and delivers it. So the Postal Service is really, really trying very hard to try to get that into measurement so we can see the effects of that. But this is mail that's going through the complete network, end to end, from somebody dropping it in a blue box till delivery for that portion of the mail. And I don't know what percentage of it is caller holdout versus the stuff that's end to end, but a very large amount of mail gets pulled out ahead of time for the large mailers that are out there. I don't know what happened there. Let me get back to it. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Delivering for America plan and what's behind it, and just a little bit of an editorial there. This is something that I think was years in the making, because of the way that the Postal Service, and you'll see a couple of slides here as to what the reason is. But one of the things I did was I pulled out of a GAO report an analysis that they keep track of, and what you see is the dashed line are the Postal Service expenses, and then the solid line is the Postal Service revenue. And you can see that since 2007, their expenses have greatly exceeded their revenue. Now, some of that is because of the retiree health benefits that they've been forgiven in. And, just kind of looking forward and going into the future, the Postal Service wants to spend, $40 billion on upgrading their network. And so their expenses are going to go up, which is, I think, the reason that the Postmaster General said, we need to keep these twice a year price increases. So, that's the reality of what we're looking at and why they need to raise prices. And really, what's happened, over the past decades is, I think the Postal Service averaged about $1.7 billion a year in upgrades and maintenance of facilities. And I think most of that was just, leaking roofs and other things. And you can see just an example of some of these pictures of, just the condition of what some of these facilities look like. Now, these are probably the worst case scenarios, but anybody that's been in any one of the postal facilities, they're all kind of dimly lit. They're not organized in a very efficient way to get really, really good throughput. And so the Joy said, hey, enough is enough, and that's when they created the plan, and they said, we're going to modernize our infrastructure. And so that's, what's going to be happening for the most part for the next 4 years, and then beyond that, just kind of cleaning things up for 10 years or so. And so the other thing to consider is the Postal Service network as it was set up. Now there have been some changes, especially with first class standards, and like I mentioned before, with retail ground parcels and all that. The Postal Service for a long time had been supporting an outdated network, and the network as it stands, for the most part, it was really built to handle different classes of mail in separate operations. And the other thing which was removed with the service standard changes for first class mail is that the network had to be in place to be able to support overnight service, which for the most part is gone now in first class mail and parcels. And one of the things the Postal Service kept doing is, because their service scores hadn't really improved and there was a lot of pushback, is they just kept throwing more and more money into it with very little success trying to do this. And they were building annexes and other facilities on top of facilities. And the facilities weren't really uniform. And, back then we had the 10, 12 areas, and each one of them had a separate vice president, and they were all kind of running as separate businesses competing with each other. So there wasn't a lot of uniformity in there. And in today's environment, especially with automation, you want to have a pretty uniform type of facility. And then, e-commerce, it really changed the mail mix. I mean, back years ago, there was hardly any parcels, and now it's a pretty substantial portion of what the Postal Service handles. And so part of the 10-year plan, the Delivering for America plan, is the Postal Service wanted to go in and do all of these initiatives. I'm not going to go ahead and read them, but there's a bunch of different things around organizational structure, getting things out of air, modernizing the post offices and electric vehicles and all the rest of that stuff that they wanted to do. And so some of the noteworthy accomplishments that the Postal Service has recently announced is they said, the original projected loss of 160 billion, which I never really bought, is down to 70 billion now. So they're making some headway there. And I think a big chunk of that was the, Postal Service Reform Act, which gave them, 48, it says 48 billion, but it's really a bigger number than that. The other accomplishment, and I thought that they did a very good job, is the COVID test kits that they put out, which I think that program has now stopped. One of the other things is they converted over 100,000 employees, pre-career employees, to career status, and I think that's going to stabilize their employee base, and because they had a lot of problems hiring. One of the problems that we noticed was, especially in the carrier base, they were losing a lot of people, and even today they still need to hire a lot of carriers because they don't have enough carriers for the routes that they're doing. They have improved, and I will agree that they have improved and stabilized service performance, and they've implemented a bunch of new standards. And so these are the investments by the numbers. As you can see, they're spending a lot of money in a lot of different areas. Even in retail post offices, they want to clean those up. And so what are they doing for 2023 and beyond? Transforming the network, sales and marketing strategy. They're preparing for peak and investing, meaning spending a lot of money on their future, and they're stabilizing their workforce. So those are the main things that they're concentrating on. Now let's get into the network. So one of the things that the Postal Service, as I said, wants to do is create an integrated mail and package network as part of their redesign. And they want to have much more uniformity and make sure that the network basically runs like McDonald's or others, where no matter which facility you go into, they're all pretty much the same. And really what drove that was, if you look at their old network of what they call their middle mile facilities, which are listed below, and then you have all these service hubs, which we don't really interact with, and then all of the different delivery units. They really want to change all of that. I mean, it's pretty messy, and it's been built up over the years, and it's a problem. So the first facility that they're putting out are the regional processing and distribution centers, or what was, I think, originally referred to as the mega centers. And these facilities are going to have pretty much every type of operation, as you can see in the bottom right. They're going to handle all originating volumes like letters, packages. They're going to do some destination package processing in there. They're going to handle destination letter trays and sort and delivery centers, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And so this is a map of what the Postal Service is planning to roll out for the RPCs. And as you can see by the stars there, they're in the major metropolitan areas, which is, pretty much what we expected. So, it's anywhere between 60 and 65 or so facilities that they're going to put up. Again, they haven't fully finalized, but this is what, it's going to look like as far as where it's going to go. And one of the reasons why I put that in there, and I said before around drop shipping, is we're probably going to be dropping mail into all of these different facilities. It's not as many as the SCFs, and it's a lot more than the NDCs, so it's somewhere in the middle. So we'll have to see what the Postal Service does with pricing and incentives to try to get mail into these facilities versus going end to end. Yeah, here's a picture of the Atlanta RPDC as they're building it out. Some of the facilities that they're building out are brand new. Some they're going to retrofit, but here's a good picture of what they're working on in Atlanta, which seems to be the area where they're doing a lot of the work. And so one of the things with this RPDC in Atlanta is they'll be able to reach, they said, 7 million people next day and 55 million people in 2 days. Why is that important? As you can see on the slide, because of package, and they want to, and their program that they're trying to do to expand package volume. And so that's really what the primary reason that they're setting up this network this way for is to get reach where you can drop off parcels in the RPDC, and then within 2 days you can hit 55 million people. And so then the next level down are the LPCs, and really those are, and I put the first bullet in there, that are mostly converted SCFs. And what they're going to do is they're going to perform destination processing for letters. They're going to be handling, some destination processing for flats. They're going to put some of these SDCs or sort and delivery centers there. They're also going to put some in the RPDCs, etc. And within here, after they sort the mail, they'll take some of it downstream to some other SDCs and some to the delivery units, depending upon where the mail is going to be delivered. But this is what they're going to do with these new centers. And then lastly, these SDCs. And really what they're doing here with the SDCs is, instead of taking volume to every single one of the delivery units, what they're going to do is they're going to set up facilities where the carriers go in and pick up the mail and then deliver it with only incurring about a 30-minute more commute time for the carriers. And so, we'll have to see how that works, because in the Atlanta area, like you see in this picture, during rush hour and stuff, it might take them more than 30 minutes from where some of these kind of far out delivery units are to get over to these SDCs. And that's why I say we might see ACS rates go up, and there are a couple of other reasons that I'll talk about in a second. But that's what they're looking for, is to put some of these facilities up. And one of the good things is you're going to have a ton of carriers in one facility. So if one carrier is out, you might ask another carrier to pick up that volume and deliver it, rather than it just sitting at the delivery unit until a carrier can get over there and deliver it. There could be some challenges too, because for parcels, as an example, let's say that they're trying to deliver a parcel to your address and it's not deliverable. It's not quite clear, and I asked the Postal Service, and they really didn't have an answer for this. Are they going to take those parcels to the local delivery unit after they put the notice on your door, or are they going to take those back to the SDC and force consumers to go to that building to go claim their parcels that they couldn't deliver? So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out and what happens there. But there's a lot of nuance there that has to still be figured out. Here's an example of what they look like around the Atlanta area, and you can see they're going to set up a bunch of SDCs that are going to handle a pretty large number of routes. I mean, 2,300 routes within 10 SDCs, and that's a lot of delivery points and a lot of population. So that's really kind of the blueprint for what they're going to do for rolling these things out. Well, one of the things that I'm always concerned with is, especially if you have substitute carriers and then this additional kind of half-hour commute time and all that, there's this rule that isn't really widely known, that if a carrier is out delivering mail and they're running out of time for their route, what they do is they stop delivering the mail and then only go through and do the pickups for click and ship and that, and bring all that back, and then they take that mail, bring it back in, and then they deliver it the next day. So there's always opportunities, when with mail possibly being delayed there, and especially with the network changes and all that. I think we'll see an uptick in ACS, because of some of these delays and some of these changes that are happening, and maybe new carriers working on a route that they're not familiar with. So we'll have to see what that looks like. But again, it's just a kind of a warning message. There was an internal labor relations memo that was put out that the Postal Service has to notify labor and unions and Congress and all that. And so here's a list of the SDCs and when they're going to roll those out. I will tell you that the first one, the Athens Processing and Distribution Center, it's already changed dates twice. So as of a couple of days ago, now they're going to stand that facility up on 11/19, and then Brooklyn's going to go up on 11/26. Part of the reason for the Athens delay was a court order or a judge's ruling that just happened the other day, talking about, making changes to facilities during, election times and that. And I think the Postal Service just kind of moved that just so that they don't get any bad press from that. And the Brooklyn one, I think that's just been delayed just because it's taking longer. Because you can imagine with construction and all that, and the labor market the way it is, things just take a lot longer to do. And then finally, I don't think they're going to stand up all of these other facilities up in February. So I think those dates are going to change as well. But these are the areas of the country you want to keep an eye on, watch your mail, because there could be delays in delivery. And lastly, the Postal Service is focusing on parcels through their USPS Connect program. What you see on the map on the right is, what the rollout looks like. I think wave 1 and 2 is completed, and wave 3, for the most part, is getting pretty close to completion. So they'll have, nationwide network to push their USPS Connect products. All right, so other items of importance, and I'm going to kind of go through these quickly. Like I said, each one of these could be webinar onto itself. And so what is CAS cycle low? And we used to just call them CAS cycle low, but it's really more of an address cycle low, and I'll explain in a second what I mean by that. And what happens is when you change CAS, you also have to think about downstream processes like NCOA link, pre-sort, and anything you change up front in the CAS cycle. And for those that don't know what CAS is, it's the Coding Accuracy Support System. It's what standardizes the address, assigns the zipless floor, cleans the city-state information, and also assigns the carrier code. So that's kind of early on in the process. And there's also other processes that are part of that, like delivery point validation, lax link, sweet link, and et cetera, that are affected by a CAS cycle. Now, these things used to be yearly. I remember in the past, but it's been well over a decade since we've had a CAS cycle. So with new people kind of in the industry, this is all new to them. There's been multiple delays, as I mentioned before, but now I think we're all set for 8/1/2023. I know that a bunch of the software providers have asked for the test files, but not a lot of them have submitted them back. So it's going to take a little time as the software providers get ready and start to roll this stuff out. Now, one of the things that's a little bit different about this CAS cycle than other CAS cycles is a lot of the changes were industry driven, but there are some things like military addresses and that the Postal Service needed to get in there as well. The one really important note to take away from this is it does provide greater insight into addresses and making intelligent business decisions. And even though, some of the codes out of the new CAS cycle, because it was requested by some of the large mailers that didn't want to change their systems, will come out the same. There's a lot more detail. And so we're spending a lot of time taking, advantage of all of this new intelligence within these addresses to make sure that, we're coding everything right. Now, as part of CAS cycle O, there's going to be fewer addresses that qualify for postage discounts. It's a good thing. And the reason for that is these addresses weren't really good. And the Postal Service, now with industry figured out a way to kind of clean those up and not make them look like you're getting an automation rate and a discount for something that's not going to get delivered. As I said before, support for military addresses, cross-state addresses. This is a big thing because there's some parts of the country. Texarkana is one of the big examples, but there's addresses around the country where the post office that you get your mail from is across a state line, and the way that driver's licenses and all that work, it's really a challenge for some people, especially for getting ballots and for being able to vote in the state that they actually live in versus the state where they get their mail in. The Postal Service is going to be cleaning up a lot of that, which is really, really good. And, you know, it's been a long time coming. We're getting a lot of new data points, getting a lot of understanding into what's undeliverable, where there's a potential for fraud, where there could be delivery issues, and et cetera. And especially intelligence around where people live versus where they get their packages versus where they get their mail, which could be completely different addresses. And as part of that is going to be the NCOA link cycle O, which, you know, again, has to support the addresses that the CAS cycle is going to put out. And there's about a bunch of clarifications there. And one of the nice things is with the changes there, it's also going to return a lot more new addresses. And over on the bottom right, you could see what the financial impact will be to the Postal Service and industry and all that. And so it's a good thing for people not only to just run this stuff out of the box, but making sure you're taking advantage of all of this additional intelligence that's built in here. Because as prices go up, you need to mail smarter. And, you know, in marketing mail especially, why put something out that isn't going to get delivered? I just threw this out there because I thought this was kind of interesting. The Postal Service always publishes their shipping deadlines, and I highlighted the two, which are retail ground. And I thought it was pretty interesting that if you're sending something to, you know, military or diplomatic post offices and that, and you're sending it ground, you want to get it into the system by November 5th so that it gets delivered by December 25th. And so this retail ground stuff, you know, it just really takes a long time to deliver in some cases. And so the Postal Service, again, pushes their USPS Connect, priority mail, and some of these other services that are much faster. I thought that was kind of an interesting little tidbit. Another thing that people need to pay attention to, and I know a lot of people aren't paying attention to this, but it's really, really important, is some of the privacy regulations that are out there. And so we've had the GDPR, which is the European Union regulations. Canada has one, Brazil has one. And in the US, there's a lot of states now that have come out with regulations around privacy. And even like California now, I think is working on their third version. And Colorado is also working on some new rules. Now, the Colorado stuff, I think, doesn't take into effect until January of 2023. But we have to pay attention to this, especially those of us that store name and address data, because it is subject to all of these regulations. All 50 states, as an example, have some type of regulation around notifying customers of data breaches, and numerous states require businesses to take responsible steps to secure consumers' data. And so if you're not paying attention to this, you better pay attention to this, because this is important. I mean, we're seeing a big uptick, especially there's at least 3 law firms that I can recall off the top of my head, like Privacy Bee and others, that have built businesses around setting up websites where people could pay, and then they send out blanket letters to pretty much anybody that stores name and address data saying this person wants their information removed. And we're starting to see an uptick as law firms are trying to monetize this and make additional money. So keep an eye on this. In addition to this, a lot of people didn't notice this, but the Federal Trade Commission put out a Federal Register notice on 8/22. There's a link here at the bottom. And within that, they talk about commercial surveillance, and they define, people say, well, that doesn't really matter to me. I'm a mailer or I'm a parcel shipper. But commercial surveillance is defined as the collection, aggregation, analysis, retention, transfer, or monetization of consumer data and the different derivatives of that information. So all of a sudden that applies to us as well. Now, one of the things that I was hoping for, but it doesn't look like it's going to do anything, is it's not going to affect some of the state efforts. So we're going to have to pay attention to any rules that come out of here, including any kind of punitive charges that the FTC comes up with, and then also pay attention to all of the different state regulations. So we're going to have to watch that stuff out. And then the last thing, if you look at history, it could take 5 to 7 years to implement, but they might rush this thing through, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. And then lastly, it's not just about mail. I pulled this out of an Axios visualization. They talk about, in the kind of the digital space, where the top 600 board members of large organizations said that, they're expecting issues. And so email, cloud, all of these other stuff, we have to pay attention to that as well. And then lastly, for those of you that didn't see it, the Postal Service does publish, and it's on the PRC website, the household diary studies. Very fascinating. It shows, what people are mailing, who's mailing, what they're mailing. It's a good way to kind of understand what people are doing from a mailing perspective. And so with that, Bobby, do we have any questions?
Thank you, Angelo. We do have some questions, and we'll be monitoring that for any other questions that come in. And just a reminder, and we put that up in chat, is that everybody will receive a copy of the PowerPoint in the emails that follow the event. So let's get right to the questions. I know we have about 10 minutes left. We don't want to keep anybody longer than that. Here's the first one. Informed delivery question. If you participated this year, can you again participate next year, or do you need to be a first timer? Clearly that's in regards to the promotion.
That's an excellent question. So you can participate next year, even if you've participated this year. One thing I neglected to mention is you can only participate in one promotion at a time. So if you want to take advantage of, let's say, as an example, earned value reply mail, which is part of the Color Trans promo, you can't participate in informed delivery. You can only participate in one or the other. I think most people are probably going to want that 4% discount and participate in informed delivery.
Okay. Next question, Angelo, really in this, I think you covered parts of this, but can you talk more about the overall timeline for the changes, for the network changes?
Yeah, so
has the USPS provided any? Go ahead. Sorry about that.
So as I mentioned, one of the problems with the network changes is that the Postal Service is being very, very secretive. And they're doing that for a couple of reasons, because they have to notify the unions. They also have to notify the affected employees before they put anything out. And they also have to let certain members of Congress know, because it's going to affect their districts. And they don't want anybody to say, pass legislation preventing them from doing any of that. And so they're being very secretive about that, and they're rolling it out in phases. So, what I showed in the previous slides is everything we know to date. But it is going to evolve a little bit, and the plans are changing, and that's about all we know. We know that the bulk of it's going to be done in about 4 years.
Okay, thanks. Here's another question. Can you talk a bit more about your interpretation on the new flat prep discount? When can you take advantage of it? When can mailers get a drop ship discount? And can you confirm it will be on the mailing statement and the mailer will get the discount, not the MSP? That's a lot of questions in one question.
Yeah. So okay. So there was a postal bulletin that was put out that is allowing you to put flat mail in flat tubs. So that option already exists. So come January, there's going to be these additional discounts for trying to get mail prepared that's cross-dockable to the SCF or directly delivered to the DDU, or in the new network to the SDCs and the DDUs. Now, for the most part, the discounts, the RPDCs are going to be probably equivalent to what the current NDC discount is. The LPCs will be roughly equivalent to the SCF discounts, and then the SDCs will be roughly equivalent to the DDU discounts. And all of these discounts do go to the mailer because that's on the postage statement, right? That's what postage you're paying. Now, if a logistics company has to go to many more destinations and stuff, there could be additional charges for some of that. So that'll shake itself out as the network evolves. But for now, for January, you'll be able to take advantage of these discounts.
Okay, great. I am going to let Denise jump on and ask the next question.
All right, so we have another question in from Scott Holton. He's wondering, what about the IMBA promo with another promo? Is that considered double dipping or not?
Yes, if you want to get into IMBA, that during the time frame where there's overlap with other promotions, that'll be the only one you're able to do. So you'll have to make a decision as to which one of those gets you a better discount, or where you have more of the volume to get a better uh, you know reduction in postage.
Great. Thanks, Denise. Thanks, Angelo. Anybody else have any further questions? I know we're about 5 minutes out. I'll do that pause. And then I, of course, will thank everybody for attending today's event. If you do have any further questions, feel free to reply to any of the emails we sent out. We'll definitely have Angelo answer those. And of course, the next few days, you'll be receiving a recording and a copy of the presentation. Please feel free to share with anybody you would like. And we appreciate you and thank you for attending our webinar. Have a great day.